Welcome to the Supply Chain Pioneers podcast, where we highlight industry leaders on the forefront of innovation and technology in planning, procurement, and logistics. Hosted by your supply chain pro to know, Ulf Venn.
Supply Chain Pioneers is powered by Everstream Analytics. Everstream gives you the predictive insights and analytics to make your supply chain faster, smarter, safer, and leaner. Go to everstream.ai to book your demo today. Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of Supply Chain Pioneers. And with me today I have Scott Luton, who is the #1 voice of supply chain, really passionate about sharing stories from across the global business world. His podcast has hit several leadership charts in over 60 countries, and a really great guy. And I'm so glad he's here for my 50th episode. So welcome, Scott.
I'm honored to be here. I've been an admirer of your perspective and your point of view for quite some time. And it's great to be here and talk with you in person, or at least digitally in person, huh?
Yeah, that's really cool. And I hope we can do that soon also somewhere on a conference nearby and meet up. That would be great.
I'm jealous. I saw some of your past episodes where you and Tim Nelson and others were on this beautiful park bench with this beautiful green canopy on a lovely day. Let's do that on the next episode, okay?
That's great. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. I have the equipment. That's good. Scott, before you continue, why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. So I was born in Aiken, South Carolina. I moved to Atlanta about a little over 20 years ago. I was introduced to supply chain and data analytics by the United States Air Force. Since that time, I've spent over 20 years in a wide range of roles in supply chain largely with one of my favorite parts, a keen focus on serving in and supporting the manufacturing industry. Metal stamping and construction materials manufacturing were big stops of mine. And I've really had the pleasure of visiting and working in and visiting over 300 sites, plants, warehouses, and facilities. That's one of the favorite parts of my journey, and all the people that make up and are doing great things in those places. And all of that helped form my why for why we created Supply Chain Now, and try to tell that abundance of stories that makes up what I consider to be the best team sport in all of the world, and that's global supply chain.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, love Supply Chain Now. So before we start with the regular program, where I will ask you a lot about what you just introduced, your career and how you ended up founding Supply Chain Now and what you do at Supply Chain Now, can you quickly talk a little bit about your recent visit at Manifest? The conference just finished. You have been there. How did you like the conference? What are the exciting themes right now?
What a great question. So big kudos to the Manifest team. And I'm sure it goes far beyond Courtney and Pam and Tanzel. Those are some of the folks I've rubbed elbows with over the last couple of years. This was my second Manifest, and they continue to impress me with what they put together content-wise, programming-wise, and I'm really excited about where they go next. But I'm not sure if these themes, because I'm still processing a lot of my own eureka moments. I learned a lot from folks. I'm not sure if these are going to be exciting to you, Ulf, or not, but a lot more synergies to bring in point solutions in an orchestrated manner, if that makes sense, like in a integrated, interoperable ecosystem. But at the same time, in a weird way, it's also creating more and more disconnected systems across enterprises where it doesn't play nicely in the sandbox. So I'm keeping an eye on those point solutions and those holistic behemoths that some of the platforms can be out there, and who's friendly and who isn't. One of the beautiful things that I have witnessed firsthand over the years, but I certainly saw at Manifest, is non-supply chain folks and gurus and technologists coming into our world. That is a wonderful thing. It's really it's part of the hallmarks of global supply chain. How many times has someone said, "Hey, I stumbled into supply chain"? I love it. We need more folks stumbling in that brings that other deep expertise that makes our world better. I'm not to be confused as to be an economist, Ulf, so that is not my forte. However, as an entrepreneur and as someone that studies supply chain startups, I'm always curious. All the friction we see in this current world, tariffs and trade policies, geopolitics, how much money that's keeping on the sidelines that could be innovating our industry even further. And then Culture. I love talking about culture and leadership. And in this era of high, fast-moving, complex technology that's disrupting so much, it always goes back, I believe, to the foundations. And strong leaders with strong cultures and that know how to communicate will help organizations navigate more successfully through these times. And then finally, I said friction a minute ago. I'm a big believer, and Manifest really illustrates this in many ways. Fellowship over friction. I was sharing about this on LinkedIn earlier today. That might sound hokey and cheesy and maybe even naive to some circles, but in my view, there's so many different ways that we must, as leaders, take friction out of the day-to-day for our teams and our organizations, and for that matter, our ecosystems. And one of the long list of effective ways to do that, I believe, is investing in events like Manifest, where you can bring your suppliers, your customers, your colleagues, you name it, and spend time other than talking about the business, which usually unlocks eureka moments in the business, if that makes a little short list of things that I loved about this year's event.
Yeah, very interesting. And I also think if it comes to point solutions and ecosystems, eventually there must be a little bit of a cleanup, right? Because we have so many point solutions. There must be some mergers and acquisitions happening, and some of them might get very big. Good. You talked about people always talking about the story, how they stumble into supply chain. So I want to pick up the ball here and ask you, how did you stumble into supply chain management?
It's a great question. And I also love to learn how folks end up in this wonderful industry that we call home. For me, after I was on active duty in the United States Air Force, that's where I loaded my first plane and got a little taste of logistics. That's where I was introduced to the formal notion of data analytics, right? Way back when. We're talking in the mid-90s. So data analytics were a good bit different. So all of that, I got through high school with never even setting foot in a manufacturing facility or warehouse. I was at such a tremendous missed opportunity. My granddad retired as a machine operator at Kimberly-Clark. And I always, looking back, I wish I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with him more about that. But eventually, I would graduate from South Carolina, go to finish out my term with the Air Force, come back to Columbia, South Carolina, and I would find my way into a construction materials manufacturing facility, family owned. And that's when I really enjoyed managing the shipments, managing some imports, managing some exports, imports of raw materials, getting our products out to job sites across the country. That was challenging enough. It wasn't global, which was a good thing because it was challenged the fullest extent of my capabilities. But I got that taste. I would also work at a big food service distributor that supported a lot of mom and pop restaurants, where I really learned what it really meant to knock your customer socks off and really serve that customer. Because for mom and pop restaurants, without a franchise system behind them to support them, a missed shipment could mean a massive weekend loss, right? Or you name it. So that was really important. And then I went on to Atlanta, which changed the whole trajectory of my career. Initially starting in workforce, where I helped to deliver big-time workforce management solutions to, say, automotive manufacturers and many others. That was game-changing. I'm not sure. I look back on that 20 years ago now and fast forward, and knowing how tough it was then and thinking about the workforce challenges now, it blows my mind. I'm not sure how that beyond automation is accomplished. Then on to metal stamping, and then got my first state of startup life, focused on Lean Six Sigma and some consulting experiences to a wide range of customers. And then on to digital media, where I believe I'm doing what I was put on this earth to do. And I enjoyed all those stops, and we learned so much from each stop and each chapter. But that kind of brings you from then to now. And most of that I would put in industry or serving industry.
Yeah, that's perfect. So let me summarize this real quick. So I would I'll do the Beatles thing and say it was a long and winding road.
Yes.
Till you finally got to supply chain now, which is the place where you belong. But you did so many things like BDR, sales. You organized some conferences. Then you worked on recruiting, consulting. If you then think about all of these, right? What are some of the fundamental skills that you acquired or that helped you in all of these positions and then also now still help you with supply chain now?
This is a terrific question. And we could make a whole podcast series, you and I, because I'd love to hear your own answers to this question too. Because it's all about what we learn, and it's not good enough just to learn. We have to apply it, right? Otherwise, it's just a page in a book you might read. We got to learn and apply. And there's 3 things. There's 300 things, but there's 3 things that really comes to my mind, Ulf. One is I'm a big believer, and I think I'm testimony to this, in creating your own luck, right? I think there's so many folks, and I know I did it earlier in my career. You clock in, you clock out, rinse and repeat every day of the week, right? I did that. I'm guilty as charged. But once I began to invest in events or associations or networking or you name it, things I would call extracurricular, that is when windows and massive doors of opportunity would open. So that was a big one. I mentioned earlier that world-class food service distributor I worked for, that's always stuck with me, how they were dedicated to their customer success. And I think we all have customers. We may not realize they're customers. There's notion of internal and external customers, and I'm not sure if I subscribe to that exactly, but I try to delight my customers, and I try to delight my team members and my colleagues, and those were important lessons learned from an early age. And sometimes we got to own up to our shortcomings, right? And apologize, show the plan that we're going to overcome that gap or that mishap or what have you. And unfortunately, I know I don't see that. There is a big time accountability disposition there that I wish was more prevalent out in industry. And then lastly, experimentation. Some folks are not, and I'm not always perfectly comfortable with experimentation, but as Amazon and countless others have shown, whether it's as simple as A/B testing or much more complex and a bigger form of experimentation, several entire chapters of my journey have been big experiments, right? And everyone's not that same risk taker, but I've benefited so much by experimenting and running with the things that work and then learning and applying from what did not work. And we know that if we're not failing on some regular level, cadence, you name it, then we're probably playing it too safe. So those are 3 that come to my mind, Ulf.
Perfect. I especially like the first one because it comes down to a very basic principle of hard work. There's an athlete from Germany that was pretty popular. He played basketball. You might know him. His name is Dirk Nowitzki. You might have heard that. Yeah. He had a documentary in Germany. It's called The Perfect Shot. You should be able to watch it on Amazon. And it's a very cute documentary and about all the friendships he built along the way. But he said at the end, he says, so I had 10% talent, 20% was luck, and then 70% was hard work. And I stand by that personally as well. That's a good balance.
So Ulf, I love that, and I'm gonna write that equation down. I still remember how to solve some equations from my really bad math classes and math grades from college, but that's a straightforward one. Let me ask you though, Ulf, if you think about, we're talking pre-show, a lot in common in terms of some of our stops in our journey. What's one of your go-tos that you learned earlier in your career that you regularly act on now?
Yeah, I had a teacher. So I started in a Chinese company, and one of my favorite guys in supply chain management that I worked with, his name is Guo Xiaoguang. He was a big teacher of mine. He's very Chinese, so he's very different than any of us would be. But he told me at one point when I was like 28 or 29, he said, you're really smart and you have a lot of ideas. And then he looked at me and said, but the problem is everybody can have ideas. It's about how do you make them real, right? How do you operationalize ideas? So how do you not only have the good idea, but then put your work in to make it happen. And that, I stand by that every day. And I feel that was a great advice and one of the most important ones I've ever got. And then for me, another fundamental skill is change management, because no matter how good your idea is or how good your process you try to realize is, if nobody believes in it, it's going to be very tough. So everybody has to be a sales guy in a certain kind of way, and not everybody can, because there are so many sales guys out there that use a strange technique. Sometimes sales does have not the best charisma out there, and people don't look at this but in the end, sales is about changing habits and making people aware that they can save money by changing habits, applying a new solution or whatever. And that's why I think change management is fundamental, and everybody needs to accept that they have to be a sales manager in one way, shape, or form if they want to be successful in working operationally.
Ulf, I love that. And picking up on that sales comment there, have you ever seen the movie The Groundhog Day?
Yes.
Okay. If any of our Groundhog Day lovers out there watching or listening to us, there is a unforgettable character, I think named Ned Ryerson, and he sells insurance. And he constantly confronts Bill Murray's character, right, in a very salesy way, trying to get to sell him his next insurance policy. And I think one of the things I heard there from you, Ulf, is there's a lot of, and look, I've been in lots of sales positions in my career, so I could point the finger at me, but there's lots of really bad approaches at selling or business development or convincing people to do something you want them to do. And that Ned Ryerson character, pushy, fake, very inconveniently opportunistic, is a caricature of a lot of really bad sales approaches. But the $1 billion piece of advice that I think folks got to wrap their head around that you just shared is that there are folks out there that understand that either their full-time role or at least a portion of their operational role, you name it, is indeed a sales role, right? Because you're convincing and winning people over and change manager or what have you. And I think those that embrace that for what it is, because it's inherent in what they do day to day, you'll be able to develop that as a superpower. And that will help you in other ways of your leadership ability. Change management alone, Ulf. In this day and age where things are changing at this incredible rate and the velocity picks up every single day, gosh, the ability to win people over and help navigate them into some areas of uncomfort, that's really a superpower, whether you're transactionally selling or not. So I love that, Ulf, and I think that's one of the things we have some kindred spirits around.
Let's continue on with the present, which is super important. The most successful podcast in the supply chain space, overall an omni-channel way of delivering media assets, really changing the way people can think about supply chain and driving down change the aisle wherever needed. What was your motivation founding Supply Chain Now at the very beginning, and how did your motivation change with Supply Chain Now over time?
This is an interesting question. I had to think about this a little bit. And the genesis is going to make you laugh. It's twofold. One might be obvious. I really enjoy the facilitation of conversations and information exchange amongst people everywhere. I've enjoyed it in person. And then when I stumbled across the ability to do that digitally, I was like, oh man, this is fun. This is exciting. So that was one big reason. But then the second one was a bit more tactical, because volunteering for an association where you had certified members that had to maintain those certifications, I talked to thousands of people that could not come out to that monthly dinner meeting and get that 1 hour of CE credit. And so immediately I was like, hey, we got a webinar for that. Let's do a monthly webinar series, partially to meet that need for so many folks in my ecosystem. And then, of course, because I loved that facilitation role. And that monthly webinar series quickly gave way to podcasts, which quickly gave way to live streaming and many other things, written content more, in-person, virtual events, you name it. And all of that form what, you used a great word, omnichannel. People call me a podcaster all the time. I embrace it. I love it. As a dear former friend used to say, hey, we're podcasters, but we don't live in our mom's basement. So some folks have different mental images of the podcasting industry, but it truly has become a holistic digital media platform that we try to, some folks aren't into podcasts. They like written content, whether it's social or white papers or other things. We try to meet them where they are. Some folks recently joined our programming that have not posted to LinkedIn in 7 years. And on one hand, I find that to be refreshing. On the other hand, there's lots of folks out there that have something important to say that aren't on social media, right? And that might be more and more of a foreign concept these days. But so anyway, whatever it is, that holistic platform to reach people and practitioners where they are, whether they're trying to learn, whether they're trying to share. Of course, we're all trying to advance. And frankly, I learn. I've got the best seat in the house because I had this opportunity to learn 360 degrees. So that speaks a little bit to the genesis and how it's evolved. And just wait. We got some new stuff up our sleeves because we can't sit on our laurels.
Of course. Yeah. I have the same feeling because I have now my 50th podcast here, and I learned a lot during these 50 podcasts. And so I can totally relate to, yes, you learn a lot. And it's always good to listen.
Yes. Really quick, if I can.
Yeah.
First off, congratulations on 50 podcasts. Folks, you don't know, and I'm talking to the people out there that may not do podcasts or other shows, or there's so much work that goes into one. And to do 50 of them, especially as a hobby, as a passion project, that's something to be celebrated. So, Ulf, congratulations. The quality is fantastic. I enjoy them. And then secondly, you mentioned something really important, and I'm not doing a good job of listening to what you said, but the art of listening intently and keeping the phone, active listening, I think they call it. I think to be a great interviewer, it's important. It's so important to actively listen. And I got to tell you, Ulf, that is a skill set I'm still working on. I've come miles and miles from where I was a couple of years ago, because that's not what modern culture trains us to do. They train us to be 7-second goldfish or something, right?
Yeah. Deactivate all alerts from the phone. That helps with active listening.
So true. No Slack, no email, no texting. Yeah. I'll tell you what, it's something.
It is a little bit a lot. But I do believe you're a good active listener. And I also do believe that you like talking to people and be around people. And that's why at Supply Chain Now, you're not only telling great stories about the people in the space or the use cases, you also tell good stories about the people behind Supply Chain Now on your homepage. I really love them, by the way. So I feel you have gathered a very diverse team of employees and try to find a good way of giving them a good spotlight. Is that something that is just the person you are, or is that a conscious effort from your side?
This is I think a little bit of both. I think that we learn so much by being on diverse teams, in diverse conversations, in diverse initiatives and diverse journeys. So fundamentally, that's who I am, I believe, as a person. But we're also human. And I think as humans, you tend to create friends or be in circles that you just navigate to subconsciously. And so it's important, I have found, and this might be arguable because some folks, they don't like when I share some of these things on social. They aren't. But it's what I believe. We've got to overcome that subconscious bias, or whatever, however you call it, and break those normal, natural human biases or what have you. And that's where the intentional and deliberate part comes in play, right? Because we need to have more voices in the room. We have more voices in programming and in webinars and events. I tell you, it's not easy. I think a lot of folks, and I'm not sure your experience, Ulf, but my experience has been as someone that acts on that deliberate need and desire for our programming to be more diverse. I almost started keeping tally on the invites to be interviewed or appear on panels or whatnot, because it's a very interesting study. As someone that puts a ton of irons in the fire, we've got work to do, I believe, on more and more professionals being comfortable with themselves to come on and get behind a microphone or to get on that panel it's still, the onus is on us as leaders to make it happen. But I get a lot more no's than you would think. And there's a short list of factors why, unfortunately, many things aren't as diverse as they could be. Mm. But one of those factors are the no's that you get from folks because they don't want to get out there just yet. I don't know if that makes sense, but does that make sense to you, Ulf?
No, I get this. And I also think sometimes people are asking too much if they can do something instead of just going out and do it. And the characters that essentially want to move forward are willing to share and disruptive are often, of a certain type of person. And then you cater, the content automatically caters, and it's easier to invite these people. Because I get a lot of no's because people are like, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do this and so on. And then they want to ask and so I get it.
And for folks that are watching or listening, none of that is meant to be an excuse or a rationalization, because at the end of the day, it is a leadership problem, right? We've got to find more and more, because really the power of diversity, you look at our team and we've got a lot of complementary skill sets, and then we have some very different skill sets, right? Yeah. And it makes us so much better, and it really empowers our superpowers when you've got more talented people doing certain things, right, that you don't do well, especially. So it's an ongoing study, Ulf. It's an ongoing study.
Yeah, it is. But I believe you're trying your best personally, because, again, just looking at the descriptions of each and every talent you have in your organization on your homepage was a sight to behold. I was really enjoying that.
I'm impressed.
No, good. Also, I haven't talked about this yet, but everybody needs to follow you, obviously, on LinkedIn, because it's probably one of the best content out there. So refreshingly positive and genuine. Good. I have a very short question for you. What happens on April 29th?
Oh, that is a good question. It's a good question. National Supply Chain Day. It is a day set aside where we celebrate our industry globally, right? And especially the people that make it happen each and every day. Mary Kate Love, president of Supply Chain Now and a very talented colleague, started National Supply Chain Day when she was at Georgia Pacific. They had a great innovation center called Point A way back in the day. And she filed to create National Supply Chain Day. And ever since she joined our team several years back, we have been committed to continuing that mission and reinvigorating that mission and finding new ways of celebrating our industry. And again, don't let the name fool anybody, because we believe every nation should have a National Supply Chain Day. So I'm hoping that we give ideas through our work for people everywhere to celebrate our industry and the people and the mission.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great initiative to have a day dedicated to what's happening, because in the end, supply chain connects the world. It's a very complex puzzle to be solved as well, and it can be very tricky. So it's great to appreciate that and have a day to appreciate it. So it's a great initiative.
I'm with you. I appreciate it. And tip of the hat to Mary Kate and the rest of our team for acting on it.
Yeah. So now I want to go. We went to the future, so now I want to go far back. Okay. So you are an U.S. Army veteran with an amazing career, essentially, right? And I want to ask you, which were some of the big upsides serving in the U.S. Army that helped you throughout your career later on?
So, Ulf, I appreciate this question. And I don't want to get in trouble. I was in the U.S. Air Force, and we get made fun of a lot from folks in the Army and the Marines and the Navy. There's a healthy inter-service rivalry, and it's all in good fun. So I served in the U.S. Air Force on active duty for about 3.5 years, and there's a couple things come to mind to your question. I talk a lot about business maturity. I don't know if you do as well, but sometimes you come across folks that are not nearly as business mature as their age, and then lots of vice versa, especially in this environment. Students, it's amazing how business savvy and mature they can be. But anyway, being in the Air Force, that personal maturity, that you grow up quick, right, through basic and training and then being independent, And that certainly impacts business maturity. And I think that's a great thing. Service, the notion of service. I think I did a series called Veteran Voices for a long time where I interviewed a bunch of veterans. And one of our guests once told me that veterans that serve, when they take the uniform off, that their service continues. And that stuck with me. And I see that so often now. And it's not only the veteran community, right? But just this notion of service that we experience. And I think it's so important that all of us give forward, as we like to call it here. Being a force for good, whatever that means, wherever y'all are, folks listening or watching, but trying to be a force for good each and every day is really important. And then lastly, and this I think is really particularly relevant for folks in global supply chain that major in the friction and the disruption, and they find a way each and every day to overcome it all, to deliver, and that's overcoming adversity. We all, I'm sure you did too. I know I've had plenty. It continues in some ways, but finding ways to not let that same adversity, whether how big, no matter how small, overcome not only your physical path, but your mental path. And that is something that sticks with me from way back in San Antonio, where I went to basic training for the Air Force, through every day and every chapter of this entrepreneurial journey that I love so much.
Yeah. I actually was expecting more standard answers because you already talked about how to work. So I was expecting waking up every day in the morning, being able to do the work, but that was a very good answer.
They let us sleep till noon in the Air Force. Just kidding, just kidding. All my Air Force buddies getting mad at me.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, now we were at the present, we were deep in the past, we also talked about everything in between. Now I want to talk quickly about the future, and that would, for you, it means you're so much in touch with different technologies, you're talking to a lot of leaders in supply chain management, you are also yourself a big thought leader in this space. So I just have to ask, okay, what for you is the next future thing that is coming to this space that is super exciting?
Ulf, I tell you, we could also create a whole series around this question too, I think. It's been tough, even for someone that studies every day and talks with these innovators and, of course, practitioners that are doing so much of this in this golden age of supply chain tech happen. But for me, I go back to a basic principle that excites me the most. I mentioned my granddad earlier in our chat here, a hardworking, he retired as a machine operator for Kimberly-Clark, but that was really a second career. He was a store manager for Winn-Dixie. He was also in the military. He worked hard for his family at home, one of the hardest working individuals I've ever known. Also had the most integrity, the most selflessness. And I think of the Dick Rutlands out there in our workforce right now, right? Salt of the earth. They work hard for customers. They work hard for their teammates. They work hard for the organization. A lot of what they do goes thankless. Let's just face it. It goes thankless, right? And I think of this technology so much on so many different levels, of course, from AI to automation to you name it. It goes back to the trillion-dollar question is how can we create for the Dick Rutlands out there a better, safer environment for where they can find more success every day, both for themselves and their living and for their families and their wages and their quality of life, but also do all of that while they're finding success for their organizations and protecting that work-life balance. Because it's not good enough to equip them with all the latest and greatest technology and then say, hey, you're going to work 52 hours a week. Some folks may love that, but a lot of folks don't want to do that. They want to protect that extra time with their family because this life and this journey is very finite, right? And every hour that you give up to work is one less precious hour you get with your family. We've got no shortage of workforce challenges, and it's not lost on me that a lot of jobs are going to be replaced by technology. However, as each and every industrial revolution has shown throughout history, it creates a lot more jobs than it replaces, especially any of y'all out there listening and watching. As long as you're willing to learn something new and do that, raise your hand and volunteer, you're going to have tons and tons of opportunities. So that excites me. I think of the workforce. I think of all they do every day that is in the blind spot for so many. and how can we enable their success and the organizational success and push the industry forward all at the same time.
Great. This is perfect. So we're near to the end of this podcast. I have one final question that is the fun hobby surprise question. So you don't know any about this, but my question for you today is, because I really love your background, can you pick 2 items from your background and tell us how they relate to supply chain now and supply chain management in general?
Oh man, to supply chain now and to supply chain management in general. Let me grab one.
Yes, grab one. Yeah, perfect.
So this might not be the one you're expecting, but it's a good one.
Good.
So this here is Moonshine. Ulf, do you know what Moonshine is?
No.
Okay. So Moonshine, I don't have the dictionary definition, but is full grain liquor, right? Adult beverages. And in this case, this is like 140 proof. This is made with 50% corn and 50% cane sugar, 70% alcohol by volume. Mm-hmm. So White Lightning, Moonshine, this was illegal for a long time in the States because of the dangers in producing it. So anyway, now that alcohol history lesson is complete, this is also from Granddaddy Mim's, which is a distillery in North Georgia. Now, my father-in-law, Fred Midkiff, introduced me to Granddaddy Mim's, which is operated by a country music singer, Tommy Townsend. And one of the first road trips that we took the podcast, we took it up to this Granddaddy Mim's distillery up in North Georgia. And we figured out and learned more about the Moonshine supply chain, right? Because, Ulf, as you and I both know, everything has a supply chain. You got folks that may not realize that, but everything has a supply chain. But so that's the supply chain tie-in. But when I think of supply chain now, at the time that we visited this distillery, and while this sits on my shelf, we were talking earlier about your hobby with supply chain pioneers, right? At the time, supply chain now, when we went up there to this distillery, was a hobby for me. It was a sheer hobby. I love packing the mics up and putting the stands in my car and the mixer and driving out to places and gathering perspective. But it was at this recording that my father-in-law said, "Hey, Scott, you're really good at that, and you need to find a way to do more of it." Mm-hmm. And that was a critical juncture that popped the light bulb off above my head and said, "Hey, I want to do what I love to do in this life." And Fred's comment gave me the confidence to go take a little extra footsteps more into the uncomfort zone. And all of that led to creating Supply Chain Now largely as it exists today, and where it turns into the reason I get out of bed every morning and the reason I go to bed each and every night. So that's why this sits on right behind me every day, because that was an instrumental moment in this incredible journey that we've been on.
I'm so glad I asked this question. This was amazing. Thank you so much. And also, now that we are at the end of the podcast, unfortunately, thank you so much for coming on. It's a great honor.
Ulf, you're doing great, incredible work. And I know that we were talking pre-show about where this started for you and where this genesis was. And I tell you, the feedback you get for what you do, and then how that led to what you're doing now, there's no telling what's next. But thanks for all the kind words. Thanks for the opportunities. And I tell you, one of the best things in life is for someone to show interest in what you do. And I'm very grateful for how you've done that for me here today.
Super. Good. And then now I hope all of you showed interest today by watching this episode to this very end. So for everybody who's watching, listening, or however you enjoyed this podcast, I want to say a good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. And with this, bye-bye.
This was Supply Chain Pioneers. Thanks for watching, listening, or however you are enjoying this podcast. You can find Supply Chain Pioneers on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all other major podcast players, as well as on YouTube at Ulf Talk Supply Chain. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. See you next time.